I ruined my granddaughter wedding before it ever began, not with gossip, not with anger. With one sentence I was never supposed to say out loud. Claire Moore was standing in front of the mirror when it happened. Morning light rested on her shoulders and the dress hung on her like it had always belonged to her. She looked calm in that fragile way young women do when they believe love has finished protecting them. I stood behind her adjusting a seam that did not need fixing. My hands moved out of habit while my chest tightened for reasons I did not want to name. The room smelled like pressed fabric and fresh flowers delivered too early. Everything looked perfect. Everything felt wrong. Claire met my eyes through the mirror and smiled, soft, trusting. That smile almost stopped me. Almost. Her phone vibrated on the table, a message from her future mother-in-law Catherine Langley. A cheerful reminder about lunch plans, heartfelt words, polite concern, all the right things said in the right tone. I had heard that tone before, years ago, in a quiet room, with paperwork on the table and a woman smiling while she asked me to sign. That memory pressed against my ribs. I leaned closer so my voice would not have to travel far. I did not raise it. I did not dramatize. I spoke the way you warn someone when danger is already near. Listen to me, Claire, I said. Never tell Catherine Langley about your inheritance. The air shifted. Not loudly, not suddenly, just enough for me to know the words had landed. She did not turn around. Her smile stayed in the mirror, but it weakened at the edges. Grandma, she said quietly, not now. I wish I had listened, but instincts are not polite, and silence has a cost. My name is Vivian Moore. I raised my granddaughter alone. There was no husband stepping in when things got hard, no relatives taking turns, no safety net waiting if I fell. It was just me and a little girl who needed someone steady enough to make the world feel safe. I learned early that fear teaches faster than comfort, so I did everything I could to keep fear away from her childhood. I worked when I was tired. I stayed calm when I was scared. I learned how to carry worry quietly so she would not have to. That kind of life sharpens you, not loudly, slowly. You begin to notice patterns. The way certain smiles linger too long. The way people soften their voices when they want compliance. The way help sometimes arrives carrying expectations. I buried mistakes before I buried people, and those mistakes taught me more than any advice ever could. I learned that danger does not always arrive shouting. Sometimes it comes organized. Sometimes it wears pearls and says it is only trying to help. Sometimes it uses words like protection and standard and family. When you have lived long enough, you stop arguing with your instincts, you listen. Claire grew up knowing how to be grateful without being gullible. She learned how to accept kindness without handing herself over to it. Or at least I thought she had. But weddings do something to young women. They soften the edges. They make approval feel like oxygen. They teach you to keep the peace even when your body is telling you something is wrong. That is why when my instincts spoke that morning, I did not push them away. I listened. Because I have learned this the hard way. Silence can be dangerous, and the wrong silence can cost you everything. I met the Langley family 6 months before the wedding and everyone else adored them immediately. Catherine Langley had a gentle voice and perfect posture. She dressed in soft colors and spoke with the confidence of someone who had never been questioned. People described her as elegant, organized, proper. Her husband Richard stood beside her like a quiet endorsement. He nodded when she spoke, smiled when she smiled. His silence felt practiced, not shy. Their sons followed the same rhythm. Ethan, Claire's future husband, was polite and agreeable. He thanked me for raising her. He said all the right things. But when his mother spoke, his eyes shifted away, like a man used to letting decisions happen around him. Lucas lingered on the edges, watching, amused. He treated family gatherings like entertainment, not responsibility. From the outside they looked flawless, balanced, respectable, the kind of family churches praise and planners defer to without being asked. But I noticed the details others missed. The first time Catherine shook my hand, she held it a second too long. She smiled and said, "You did such a beautiful job with her." Beautiful, like Claire was an object that had turned out well. She hugged Claire with a closeness that felt less like affection and more like possession. Her compliments landed heavy like markers being placed. She talked often about standards, about how their family liked things done a certain way, about how marriage was not just love but structure and responsibility. And every time she said those words, I felt my chest tighten. Because I had heard them before. In another living room, with papers on the table and a woman smiling like she was doing me a favor. Everyone else saw kindness, I saw choreography. And the more perfect they appeared, the more certain I became that something underneath was being carefully managed. I learned a long time ago that paper can do more damage than shouting ever will. The first time it happened to me, there was no argument, no raised voices, no slammed doors, just a quiet living room that smelled like coffee and sympathy after a death in the family. I was tired in a way sleep could not fix. Grief does that to you. It slows your thinking. It makes you grateful for anyone who offers to help carry the weight. That was when a woman arrived with a folder and a gentle smile. She spoke softly. She said she only wanted to make things easier. She said the paperwork was standard, protective, temporary. She sat at my kitchen table like she belonged there. She slid the papers toward me with care. She pointed to places to sign. She told me I did not need to read everything. She said we could go through it later. I wanted peace more than I wanted clarity, so I signed. Weeks later, I took copies of those documents to a professional, a woman named Marian Ellis who worked with trusts and property for a living. She read them slowly, quietly. When she finished, she did not scold me. That is how I knew it was serious. She told me control had almost been transferred out of my hands. She showed me the language that sounded helpful but was not. She showed me how temporary had no ending, how protection meant access. It took months to undo what I had signed, months of stress, months of fear that I had nearly lost everything I was trying to protect. That is when I learned something that never left me. Some people do not steal with force. They steal by making you feel rude for asking questions. They steal by arriving when you are tired, when you are grieving, when you want to be agreeable more than you want to be safe. So when Catherine Langley spoke about organization and standards, my body remembered before my mind did. And I knew paper was coming. People hear the word inheritance and they imagine champagne in excess. That was never our reality. Claire did not grow up wealthy in any visible way. She went to public school. She worked part-time jobs. She learned how to stretch a dollar and keep receipts. She learned to say thank you without explaining herself. What she did not know for most of her life was that value can sit quietly for decades without announcing itself. Before Claire was born, there was land tied to our family line. Plain-looking acreage most people drove past without slowing down. The kind of property no one brags about because it does not look like anything special. But beneath that land were rights, long-term leases, royalties that accumulated slowly and steadily, payments that arrived quietly and were put away just as quietly. When the numbers first became real enough to scare me, I did not celebrate. I locked the documents in a drawer and sat alone until my breathing slowed. Wealth that arrives without noise is the kind that disappears just as quietly if you are careless. That is why a trust was created, not to make anyone rich overnight, but to protect what had taken generations to hold on to. It was layered, guarded, boring on purpose. Claire was allowed to live an ordinary life because ordinary is safe. When people think you are average, they do not study you. They do not count your steps. They do not plan around you. The trust was not a trophy. It was a boundary. Years ago, Marian Ellis told me something I never forgot. She said silence can be strategic. It can be legal. It can be the difference between control and surrender. If people outside the trust believe they have access, the trouble does not start with theft. It starts with entitlement, with assumptions, with family members believing marriage opens doors that were never meant for them. That is why no one needed to know, not neighbors, not friends, not future in-laws. And that is why 2 days before the wedding I chose to speak. Because once information is spoken, it cannot be taken back, and I was not willing to watch history repeat itself through my granddaughter. I chose my moment carefully, or at least I thought I did. 2 days before the wedding, Claire sat across from me on my couch. Her hair was pinned up for the rehearsal. Her face looked tired in that quiet way brides get when everyone has been touching them all day. She smiled like she was trying to stay grateful, like nothing was allowed to be wrong this close to the ceremony. I did not want to frighten her. I wanted to sharpen her. I told her the truth without dressing it up. I said marriage changes more than a last name. It changes what people feel entitled to ask for. It changes how bold they become. I told her never to mention the trust, not to her husband, not to his mother, not to anyone in that family, not as a joke, not as reassurance, not even by accident. Claire listened quietly. Then she said what I expected her to say. Catherine has been kind to me. She just likes things organized. That word again, organized. I kept my voice calm because panic spreads when elders show it. I told her kindness and danger are not opposites. Some people do not reach with their hands, they reach with rules. She looked at me like she was trying to decide whether I was exaggerating, whether this was fear talking instead of experience. Her phone buzzed on the table. Catherine again. Claire did not answer. Her fingers were cold when she reached for my hand. Why would she do that? Claire asked quietly. I did not give her a dramatic answer. I gave her an honest one. Because marriage makes some people believe your private life has become their business, and once that belief settles and they stop asking, they start acting. Claire nodded slowly. I could see the bride in her fighting the instinct to keep the peace at all costs. I told her this. Silence is not weakness, silence is control, silence is a locked door. She squeezed my hand and promised she understood. I hoped that would be enough. The morning after the wedding did not feel dangerous. That is what made it dangerous. Claire came by my house early, still wearing that quiet glow newly married women carry before reality catches up. Her hair was loosely tied back. She carried her shoes in one hand like she was a girl again. We sat at my kitchen table with coffee and eggs. The kind of simple breakfast that makes you believe life has settled into something gentle. Her phone buzzed. Catherine, again. Claire smiled apologetically and set it face down. She said Catherine was excited. She said families just get enthusiastic after weddings. I did not argue. I watched. I watched how her smile stayed fixed a second too long. I watched how her appetite faded after a few bites. I watched how her body reacted before her words did. I reminded her of what I had said. She nodded. She said she had not told anyone anything. That was when the doorbell rang. It was not a casual ring. It was firm, certain, like someone who expected the door to open. I knew before I reached the handle. Catherine stood in the hallway with her purse tucked neatly under her arm, Richard beside her. Lucas leaning back slightly like this was entertainment. Ethan stood just behind them. Not leading, not stopping anything. And next to them was a man I had never met holding a leather folder. Catherine smiled wide and warm. She said they were already nearby. She said this would only take a few minutes. She said it was just a formality. The man stepped forward and introduced himself as a notary. I felt the room tighten around us. Paper had arrived right on time. Catherine did not wait to be invited inside. She stepped in as if the decision had already been made. She spoke while she moved. Calm voice. Pleasant tone. She said this would be quick. She said it was routine. She said families like theirs like the whacked off organized. The notary stood quietly near the table. He placed the folder down with care. No rush. No explanation, just presence, that was the point. Catherine turned to Claire and smiled the way adults smile when they expect obedience. She said this was simply an acknowledgement. Nothing was being given away. Nothing would change. It was just paperwork. Richard nodded once. Lucas smirked and leaned against the counter. Ethan stood there silent. His eyes moved from the papers to the wall and back again. He did not speak. Catherine slid the top page forward and tapped the signature line with one finger. She said, everyone does this. She said you do not want to start a marriage with conflict. Conflict. The word hung in the air like a warning dressed as advice. The notary opened his folder and set out his stamp and pen. The sound was small but final. It did not belong in a home. Claire looked at the paper. Then at Ethan. She waited for him to say something that would let her breathe. He did not. Her hand hovered near the pen, not because she wanted to sign, because she had been taught to be polite, because pressure feels heavier when it is wrapped in smiles. Catherine softened her voice. She said Claire was tired. She said this would put her mind at ease. She said they could all relax afterward. Relax. After she signed. I watched the room the way I learned to watch years ago. Who stood where? Who blocked exits? Who spoke? Who stayed quiet? This was not a conversation, it was a setup. 5 minutes, that is all it would have taken. 5 minutes and a signature could have shifted control in ways Claire did not yet understand. The pen sat there waiting, small, ordinary, dangerous. And that was when I stepped forward. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse anyone of anything. I stepped forward just enough to be seen and spoke calmly, the way you do when you are done being impressed by manners. Before she signs anything, I said, I need one thing clarified. Catherine turned toward me with a smile that tightened at the corners. She said this was unnecessary. She said everything was standard. I did not look at her. I looked at the man with the folder. Which trust are you referencing? I asked the notary. The question landed wrong. I could feel it. It did not belong in the script they had brought with them. The notary hesitated, just a second, long enough to matter. Then he answered plainly. The Moore Family Trust. Claire turned toward me slowly. Her eyes widened. Catherine lifted her chin and said yes. Exactly, like naming it made it harmless. I nodded once. Then I said the sentence that changed everything. That trust ended yesterday. The room shifted, not dramatically, quietly, like a floor giving way under careful feet. The notary looked back down at the papers. This time he did not skim. He read, page by page. Slower, more careful. Catherine leaned forward and said they had done this before. That it was routine. Her voice was still calm, but the sweetness had thinned. The notary did not respond to her. He kept reading. When he finally spoke again, his tone had changed. He said the original trust dissolved upon marriage. A new trust had taken effect, one with different terms. He paused. Then he read the next line out loud. Spouses and in-laws were excluded. No one moved. Then he read further. Any attempt to pressure or rush the beneficiary would trigger forfeiture of future claims. The pen was quietly removed from the table. And for the first time since they arrived, Catherine Langley had nothing to say. Claire did not cry. That was the first thing I noticed. She stepped back from the table slowly, like someone realizing the ground is not where they thought it was. Her eyes moved from the papers to the notary and then to Catherine. The softness she had carried all morning was gone. The notary cleared his throat and closed the folder. He said he could not proceed. He said he would need verification and clear consent. His voice stayed professional. Final. Catherine tried to recover. She said there must be a mistake. She said this could be handled later. She said everyone was overreacting. Claire did not argue. She asked one question. You brought a notary to my grandmother's house the day after my wedding, she said, without telling me. Catherine replied that it was responsible, that this was how families protected each other. Claire looked at Ethan then, really looked at him. She waited. He opened his mouth, closed it, and looked away. That was the moment something hardened behind her eyes. She told the notary thank you. She told Catherine the signing was over. She said no more visits like this would happen again. Her voice was calm, steady, not angry, certain. Catherine's smile thinned. She gathered the papers quickly, frustration leaking through her movements. The notary packed his things and left. When the door closed behind him, the house felt different, quieter, safer. Claire stood there for a moment, breathing slowly. Then she reached into her pocket and sent a short message to Marion Ellis. She told the trustee what had happened. She did not ask for permission. She did not apologize. She chose herself. And I knew then that whatever happened next, my granddaughter would not be easy to corner again. People talk about marriage like it only changes your last name. What it really changes is how bold other people become. Once vows are spoken, some families stop seeing boundaries. They start seeing access. They believe love has unlocked doors that were never theirs to open. I watched it happen in real time. Catherine did not arrive angry. She arrived confident. Certain she was entitled to Claire's signature. Certain no one would challenge her timing. Certain politeness would do the work for her. That is how pressure works. It does not announce itself. It rushes you while smiling. It tells you it is for your own good. It warns you not to create conflict when conflict is already standing in your living room. Marriage makes young women want to prove they belong. It makes them fear disappointing people more than disappointing themselves, and people who know that will use it. Paper becomes the weapon, not because it is loud but because it looks harmless. A pen, a line, a signature, all wrapped in language that sounds mature and responsible. What saved Claire was not anger, it was awareness. She stopped trying to be agreeable and started paying attention. She learned something that day that took me years to learn. Love does not require surrender, and family does not get access just because they demand it politely. Marriage does not mean you owe everyone your trust. It means you must protect it more carefully than ever. After they left, I locked the door and did not say anything for a long time. Claire stood in the middle of my living room like someone seeing a familiar place for the first time. Not because it had changed, because she had. I went to the cabinet where I keep old papers and warnings written in my own hand. I placed the folder back inside and turned the key. The sound was soft. Final. Claire watched me do it and nodded. She understood. Silence did not protect her by accident. It protected her because it was chosen. Because it was held long enough for the truth to show itself. She did not lose her marriage that day. She lost an illusion. And that loss gave her clarity instead of fear. Some people call silence weakness. They are wrong. Sometimes silence is the lock that keeps predators out. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on where you may be rushing yourself to keep the peace. If you believe more women need to hear this story, please like and share it. And if you have ever been pressured to sign something you did not fully understand, tell us in the comments. Your experience might protect someone else.